Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're diving into a term that you might have heard thrown around, what some people call brain rot. Now, it's not like a real medical term, but you know what it feels like, right? That kind of mental fog that sets in after spending way too much time in front of a screen. So in this deep dive, we're going to really try to understand what's happening in our brains when we fall into that, the endless scroll. And maybe even more importantly, how do we get out of it? How to get back that focus and mental clarity that we all crave. So first of all, what exactly are we talking about when we say brain rot? One of those sources I was looking at described it as, this feeling of mental exhaustion, decreased cognitive function. It's almost like your brain just gets overloaded from all the digital stimulation. Kind of like when you look up and it's 3 a.m. and you're like 200 videos deep into some YouTube rabbit hole, and your brain's screaming at you saying like enough already, but somehow your thumb just keeps on scrolling. And the really wild thing is this brain rot isn't just some feeling. It's actually, impacting our brains in ways that we can actually measure. Like, for example, one source I was looking at talked about how these constant digital distractions that we're all bombarded with, they actually affect our working memory. And working memory, that's like the mental space where we hold and manipulate information. So, when you're trying to focus on something, let's say writing an email or something, and then a notification pops up, it's like, boom, it just disrupts that whole working memory process, makes it so much harder to just stay on track. And it's not even just about those few seconds that you're glancing at. The notification research shows that like every time we get distracted like that, it can take up to 20 minutes to fully regain your focus. Now imagine that happening, multiple times an hour. It's no wonder we all feel so like unproductive and mentally drained by the end of the day. It's like we're constantly hitting the reset button on our concentration, and it's exhausting. And even more concerning is that this constant state of distraction can actually lead to something called information fatigue. Like our brains are bombarded with so much information from the internet that we start to, actually experience a decline in our ability to process it all effectively. And this has real world consequences. Like it can impact our decision making, making us more impulsive and less likely to really think critically about the choices that we're making. So it's not just about, feeling a little bit mentally sluggish. It's about a real decline in our cognitive abilities. And then there's the emotional toll that this brain rot can take. We can't forget about that. One source pointed out that, all these carefully curated lives that we see on social media, they can actually trick our brains into thinking that everybody else is happier or more successful than we are. It's like we're constantly comparing ourselves to these like idealized versions of other people, and that can fuel your feelings of inadequacy or anxiety or even depression. But it's not just about the content that we're consuming. It's also about the way that these social media platforms are designed to keep us hooked. All those notifications and the likes and the, never-ending feeds, they all tap into our brain's reward system, creating this kind of dopamine-driven cycle where we're constantly seeking out that next hit of validation. It's like carrying around a slot machine in our pockets, and we just keep pulling the lever, hoping for a win, but it never really satisfies. It just leaves us feeling kind of empty and wanting more. And all the while, our attention spans are shrinking because we're getting so used to these like bite-sized bits of information and constant stimulation. One source even called it attention fragmentation, which is basically like our minds get so used to jumping from one thing to the next that we lose the ability to just focus on one thing for an extended period of time. You ever try to like read an article and then a notification pops up and you're completely derailed, like you just can't even remember what you were reading?
Yeah.
That's that attention fragmentation in action. So yeah, we painted kind of a bleak picture here about this brain rot and this impact on our minds and our emotions. But here's the good news. We're not totally powerless against this digital deluge. There are things we can do to kind of reclaim our focus and boost our mental clarity and break free from this cycle of distraction. And that's what we're going to get into in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore some practical strategies for combating brain rot. Everything from curating our social media feeds to rediscovering those activities that really require our focus and bring us genuine satisfaction. So stick around. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back. All right, so before the break, we were talking about this whole idea of brain rot and how it affects us. And now we're going to get into some solutions, because the good news is we don't have to just like surrender to this digital fog, right? Like there are things we can do. And one of the first things, and might seem kind of obvious, but it's really about taking control of our social media feeds, because it's just so easy to get sucked into that endless scroll, comparing ourselves to everybody else's highlight reel. But like, what if we kind of flip the script on that? What if we were a lot more intentional about who we're following and the content that we're seeing? One of the sources I was reading actually suggested, unfollowing those accounts that are constantly triggering those negative emotions in us. The ones that make you feel inadequate or envious or just kind of bad about yourself, basically. And instead, like, what if we replace those with accounts that actually inspire us or make us laugh or teach us something new? Imagine if like your social media feed actually became like a source of positivity and motivation instead of that breeding ground for comparison and self-doubt, right? It's kind of a revolutionary idea when you think about it. But it's not just about what we're consuming, it's also about how much we're consuming. And that's where setting boundaries around our screen time becomes really crucial. One of the things I saw suggested was creating like a digital curfew, which basically means like putting your devices away at least an hour before you go to bed.
Yeah, I know easier said than done, right? But think about it. That blue light from our screens, it actually messes with our sleep. It suppresses melatonin production, which is the hormone that regulates our sleep-wake cycle. So you're not only like contributing to that brain rot during the day, but then you're also messing up your sleep, which just makes that feeling of mental fatigue even worse. So by creating a digital curfew, you're not only like giving your brain a break from the constant stimulation, but you're also actually improving your sleep quality, which then, leads to better mood, more energy, better cognitive function the next day. It's like a win-win. And when we're talking about giving our brains a break, let's talk about some things that we can do that actually nourish our minds instead of just draining them. Remember those things we used to do before we were like constantly plugged in? Like reading a good book or going for a walk in nature or pursuing a creative hobby or even just like having a good conversation with a friend. I know these things might seem kind of old-fashioned in our hyper-connected world, but they're actually incredibly powerful ways to kind of fight back against that brain rot. Like, for example, one of the sources I was looking at talked about the benefits of reading for improving focus and attention span. Like when you're reading, your brain's fully engaged, right? It's processing the words, it's creating these mental images, it's following the narrative. It's like a workout for your brain. It strengthens those cognitive muscles. And then what about spending time in nature? Like there's tons of research that shows that even just brief exposure to nature can lower your stress, improve your mood, and boost your cognitive function. It's like hitting the reset button for your brain. You just feel more refreshed, more grounded, and mentally clear. But here's the key. You can't just like passively consume nature. You have to actively engage with it. One of the sources suggested practicing what they call mindful walking, which is basically just paying attention to the sights and the sounds and the sensations of your surroundings as you're walking.
It's about being present in that moment, noticing the rustling of the leaves or the chirping birds or the feeling of the sun on your skin. And this idea of mindfulness, it can be really powerful for combating brain rot, Because by focusing on the present moment, you're actually training your mind to resist those distractions that are always trying to pull you away. And over time, this can really help you develop a greater sense of focus and clarity and just peace of mind. So we've talked about curating our social media feeds, setting boundaries around screen time, engaging in activities that nourish our minds. But there's one more really important piece to this puzzle, and that is the power of real human connection. Like in this digital world that we live in, it's just so easy to let those face-to-face interactions kind of fall by the wayside, right? We text instead of calling, we scroll through social media. Instead of meeting up with friends, we just kind of retreat into our little digital bubbles. But the thing is, our brains are wired for connection. Like we need those face-to-face interactions to thrive.
One of the sources I was reading even suggested that, despite all the promises of connection that we get from social media, can actually leave us feeling more isolated and lonely. It's like we're surrounded by all these people online, but we're actually lacking those deep, meaningful connections that truly nourish our souls. Think about the last time you had a conversation that really energized you. A conversation that went beyond just small talk, a conversation that like dove into something meaningful, something that left you feeling inspired and connected and just alive. Now think about how you feel after spending like hours scrolling through social media. Did it leave you feeling the same way? Probably not right. In fact, you might have even felt more drained, more disconnected, more dissatisfied with your own life. And that's because those virtual interactions, while they might give us like a temporary sense of connection, they just can't replace the richness and the depth of real human interaction. So how do we cultivate those real-life connections that are so crucial for fighting this brain rot? Well, it starts with being really intentional about our interactions. So instead of relying on text messages, maybe pick up the phone and call a friend. Instead of scrolling through social media, invite someone to go for a coffee or a walk in the park. And instead of spending another night binge watching Netflix, maybe join a club or a group that aligns with your interests and meet some new people. I know it might feel awkward at first. We might stumble over our words, we might feel a little shy or unsure of ourselves, but it's worth it. Because on the other side of that awkwardness is the potential for real connection, for laughter, for shared experiences, for that sense of belonging that you just can't replicate in the digital world. And you never know, that awkward first conversation could lead to a lifelong friendship or a romantic relationship or a new business partnership or just a simple moment of shared humanity that brightens both of your days. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. We have the power to choose how we engage with technology. We can let it control us and consume us and contribute to that feeling of brain rot. Or we can use it as a tool to connect, to learn to create, and to enhance our lives in meaningful ways. The choice is ours. We'll be right back to wrap up this deep dive into brain rot and explore how we can reclaim our focus, our mental clarity, and ultimately our lives in this digital age. Welcome back to our deep dive into brain rot. So we talked about a lot, the science behind digital distraction and the power of real human connection. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with some, actionable steps you can actually take to reclaim your focus and your mental clarity. And it all starts with recognizing that you have a choice. You don't have to be a slave to your devices. You can choose to engage with technology in a way that serves you instead of letting it, control you and your attention. So what does that actually look like in practice? Well, one thing you could try is turning off those notifications, those pesky little things. Think about it. Do you really need to know the second someone likes your Instagram photo or comments on your Facebook post? I mean, those little pings and buzzes, it might seem harmless, but they're constantly pulling you away from what you're doing, fragmenting your attention, contributing to that feeling of mental overload. And while you're at it, why not take a look at your social media feeds and do a little digital decluttering? Unfollow those accounts that trigger those negative emotions, the ones with the perfect highlight reels that just make you feel bad about yourself. Instead, try to seek out content that inspires you, that makes you laugh, or teaches you something new. Remember, your social media feed should be a source of positivity and motivation, not, a breeding ground for comparison and self-doubt. You have the power to choose what you consume, and that choice can have a huge impact on your mental well-being. And speaking of choices, let's talk about how you're spending your free time. When was the last time you did something that really engaged your mind and brought you like a sense of fulfillment? Was it reading a good book? Losing yourself in a creative project? Maybe exploring the great outdoors? One of the sources I was looking at emphasized this idea of rediscovering the joy of activities that really require focus and bring us, genuine satisfaction. And these activities are crucial for fighting brain rot and reclaiming our mental clarity.
So think about those things you used to love doing before you were constantly plugged in. Maybe it was playing an instrument or painting, writing, gardening, spending time in nature. Whatever it was, make a commitment to carve out some time for those activities in your week. And when you do make a conscious effort to be present in that moment, put away your phone, silence the notifications. Just allow yourself to get completely absorbed in whatever you're doing. You might be surprised at how refreshing it feels to unplug and engage with the world in a more mindful way. You might even rediscover a passion that you thought you lost. Now I know what you're thinking. You're like, this all sounds great, but I'm so busy. I don't have time to read or go for nature walks or pursue hobbies. And I get it. We live in a busy world, right? It always feels like there's not enough time to do everything. But here's the thing. When we prioritize our mental well-being, when we take the time to recharge and reconnect with ourselves, we actually become more productive in other areas of our lives.
It's like taking a break from work to go for a walk. You might feel like you're wasting time, but when you come back, you're refreshed, you're re-energized, and you can focus better. And the same principle applies to taking care of our mental health. So even if it's just for 15 minutes a day, make a commitment to do something that nourishes your mind and spirit. Read a few pages of a book, meditate, listen to some calming music, go for a walk in the park, whatever helps you feel grounded and centered. And don't forget the importance of human connection. Make time for those face-to-face interactions that truly feed your soul. Call a friend instead of texting, invite someone out for coffee or dinner, join a club or group that aligns with your interests. Remember, we're social creatures, and those real-life connections, they're absolutely essential for our well-being. They give us a sense of belonging and support and purpose that we simply can't find in the digital world. So as we wrap up this deep dive into brain rot, I want to leave you with this challenge. For the next week, try to be more mindful of your technology use. Just notice how it's making you feel. Are you feeling drained, distracted, overwhelmed? Or are you feeling connected, informed, inspired? If it's the former, take some time to think about what changes you can make to reclaim your focus, your mental clarity, and ultimately your life. Start small. Turn off those notifications. Unfollow those negative accounts. Make time for activities that nourish your mind and spirit, and make an effort to connect with people in real life. You might be surprised by how much of a difference these small changes can make. And you never know. You might even discover a whole new way of being in the world, one that's more present, more mindful, and more fulfilling. So that's it for this deep dive into brain rot. Thanks for joining me. I hope you found it insightful and empowering. And remember, you have the power to choose how you engage with the digital world. Choose wisely and choose well.